If This Goes On, Don't Panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to If This Goes On, Don't Panic. Today we have writer, editor, reviewer, and legal scholar Gautam Bathia. Diane, how are things going?
Oh, hey, we're doing some home renovation right now.
Oh, boy.
It's fun, actually. It's something that I've never had an opportunity to do before. I guess, because I was the last generation of you're a girl, so,
Yeah.
right? But I'm working on it with my housemate, and I'm discovering that I really like it. It's a lot of fun. It's like playing with big blocks to assemble things. Like we assembled a frame for a separator wall.
Awesome.
Right. And I also have to replace some of the drywall in my laundry room because I think I told you about that flood a few months ago.
Yes.
Right. So we're in the process of replacing that stuff now. And I got to smash the wall with a sledgehammer, and my inner child who always wanted to smash a wall somewhere is satisfied now. It's great.
Nice.
But I'm discovering that I'm not 20 anymore, right? Like,
yeah,
I have that ADHD hyperfocus thing. When I decide I'm going to get something done, I'm going to do it, right? So I spent all day yesterday doing this, right? And at the end of it, it used to be when I did something very physical, it was like, okay, I'm tired, whatever, and, sleep and recover, right? But this time, I'm 50, so it's like, oh, you know what? I need a nap. I'm so sore.
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious. Laughing at myself. It's pretty good. A little bit more recovery time required now. So, yeah. How are you doing? What are you up to?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. I can't complain too much. Luckily, we are not doing any home renovations right now. You know this about me, but the audience probably doesn't. I suck terribly at home renovations. I am so bad that people have literally asked me to stop helping because I am so bad. And I mean, seriously, like for real, people will be like, okay, you're done now. How about you just go carry that thing from there to there? And that's something I can do. Yay. Because I've got like useless skills, like, I don't know, office job skills. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I'm glad I'm not you doing that crap because I suck at it. And, in a way, I feel kind of fortunate that I suck at it, so I don't have to worry about it.
Oh, but it's a good time. Like, honestly, I really had a good time doing it yesterday. It was like playing with giant Lego for me. I thought it was the best.
See, I think what it is for me, like the perfectionist side of me gets involved, and I'm like, okay, this has to be exactly right.
Yeah, that would have driven you insane. Yep. Our first round of the frame was crooked. We had to take it apart and do it again. Yeah.
Oh, no. I would have measured it 10 times. I would have cut it, and then somehow it would still have been wrong. And I would have put it in there, and it would have been crooked, and then I would have gotten pissed off and been like, F this, and I would have kicked it and broke it, and then like walk away. You know what I mean? Like,
oh my goodness. Oh yeah, I can totally see it. But me, I guess, because my creative process, right, is discovery, right? I figure it out as I go. I'm more of a pantser than a plotter, right? So I'm like, yeah, okay, fuck, it didn't work, whatever, let's take it apart and do it again, Maybe tomorrow, though. Yeah. I'm tired now.
Yeah, that's funny. But yeah, nothing really going on. I am doing my first Comic-Con in a couple weeks, so that should be interesting. My youngest is really starting to get into comic books.
Nice.
So I've been going to comic book stores a lot and looking at the comics. And I'm starting to get into comics a little bit, but I really, I'm just trying to do it for him mostly. But I am kind of like accidentally getting dragged into it. So
what comics is your youngest into?
Oh, right now his favorite is Spider-Boy.
Sweet.
Yes. Oh, he loves it. We're also reading the all new Venom, which we're told is like the most mellow of all the Venoms because half of them are like, I'm ripping people in half and their guts are flying all over the page. But apparently this is not one of those. At least that's what the comic book guys told me. And I've read the first few and it hasn't been like that. So that's cool.
Let me know. I haven't seen those yet. I'm kind of old school, but I am an old school comic book nerd. So that's great.
Okay. Okay. And then what else? We were reading the Adventure Time one. Have you ever watched Adventure Time?
Hell yes. Hilarious show.
Yes.
Yes.
Love
one of
it.
my favorites.
All right. Before we move on any further, one thing I want to add is just so everybody out there knows, I have a different mic today. My quote unquote good mic has broken. Hopefully I don't sound too bad and I can fix this up.
I think you sound fine.
Well, you know how it is. I'm kind of feeling insecure about my microphone right now.
Insecurity issues.
Mm-hmm. Microphone insecurities. Yeah.
Your equipment is not up to standard? Is this what we're saying?
Not up to my standard, which,
Let go and let be. Nothing is ever perfect. It's all good.
Right. Oh, I try. God damn. All right. Well, we should probably get to our guest here. Okay. When we come back, we will have Gautam Bathia with us. We're back. Today we have Gautam Bathia. He is a science fiction writer, editor, and reviewer from New Delhi, India. He is most recently the author of The Sentence, which we will be talking about today. And before that, of The Wall and the Horizon. He is the coordinating editor of Strange Horizons, a free weekly magazine of fantasy and science fiction. His critical work on the genre has appeared in Strange Horizons, Inner Zone, Galaxy Planet, Himmel Magazine, and in leading English language Indian newspapers. Welcome, Gautam.
Thank you so much.
So thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I've heard a lot about your work over, I don't know, probably the last year or two, I personally, I am a huge fan of like fantasy and science fiction and even horror that really explores like social dynamics and things like that and politics and, like really thought-provoking kind of stuff. And I would say that your work definitely falls right dead center in that area.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Can you give us your origin story? Like, how did you get into writing and, how did that come about for you and what brought you into science fiction and fantasy and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that this is a story that many science fiction writers can relate to, but also, of course, it's unique for every person. When I was a kid, I think must have been 10 or 11, my parents for the summer holidays brought me Isaac Asimov's Foundation as a starting read, and the next summer they brought me The Hobbit, and I was completely hooked onto both books, and immediately fell in love with science fiction and fantasy. And then, as often happens in my teenage years, I was a huge fan fiction writer. Used to write a lot on this website called dragonmount.com, which is the Wheel of Time fandom, Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time.
Oh.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of like online fan fiction, chain writing, with other people, collaborative writing, all fan fiction for many, many years. Wrote my own fan fiction. In India, C.S. Lewis's Narnia was still massive when I was growing up. So a lot of like Narnia fan fiction, and this was pretty much all my teenage years. And I had all these handwritten novels, which are now in the trunk and will never see the light of day for good reason. And this was all, this was my teenage years. And then sometime around 2014 or so, I began to write critical work, reviews. And then I cold emailed Strange Horizons with a review, and they immediately took it on. And then I became a regular reviewer for the magazine, and then joined the magazine 2 years later as non-fiction editor. And so there were many, many years of writing fan fiction, of reviewing of critical work. And then at HarperCollins India approached me in around 2017 or so, when I was not yet 30, just under 30. And they said, we're interested in fiction that you have to offer. And that's how The Wall and the Horizon came to be written. These were two novels. I mean, they initially began life as one novel, but when I began to really get get into it, I realized that it has to be two. And so it became a 2-book series with HarperCollins. So that is, in a sense, the origin story. Just one more thing I'll add is that when I was growing up in New Delhi in the 1990s, the science fiction on offer and the fantasy on offer was quite parochial, in that you walk into a bookshop and the science fiction shelf will have Isaac Asimov, Arthur Clarke, Gene Wolfe, perhaps a bit of Ursula Le Guin. And that is maybe just a couple of Roger Zelazny's, and that is pretty much it. And the fantasy shelf will have Tolkien, Robert Jordan. Later on, not yet, but later on, A Song of Ice and Fire, and perhaps and again later on Stephen Erickson, all of that. So it was quite parochial, and therefore my initial views of the genre were shaped in that way, influenced by what I was reading. And so my initial writing, and I think this is something that a lot of writers from the global south will relate to. My initial fan fiction, my initial writing as well, my own writing, was very white in that way. All the characters had white names. The myths were Scandinavian myths, and it was very derivative. It was only after I began to engage with Strange Horizons that I realized that the genre itself has moved a lot beyond that, and it has in recent years become much more pluralistic. In both in who writes and what themes are addressed. And I think that was very important for me to do before I really seriously began my own writing, because that really informed my own world building, and I was able to just expand my world in that way. Now having seen that this is actually possible. So interestingly, the first draft of The Wall, which I wrote when I was in college in the late 2000s, was again all white names, very white themes. But then by the time I got around to doing it, finally it had completely transformed. I think that was very important, something very important that happened before I began publishing.
A very good point. I think that a lot of places still tend to lean to the parochial, as you've said, right? Like you walk into the average bookstore around here, the science fiction and fantasy section is one shelf. And that's what it's filled with, is stuff you've already heard of, and possibly some video game or role-playing game tie-ins. That's it. And it pisses me off, quite frankly, right? You gotta go to Amazon, you gotta go elsewhere, right? You gotta read the magazines that are being published now to find out who you should be reading in novel form. And, I'm glad that it's expanding, but at the same time, the market seems to be shrinking, at least the interface with the public. And that's something that is a soapbox issue of mine personally. So shout out there to bookstores. Like, there's more going on here than Asimov and C.S. Lewis. Expand your stuff, right? If you want to find expanded stuff these days, I find often the place to start is young adult fiction, because almost all of it, they put it all together. They don't bother separating it by genre. They call that a genre in and of itself, but 90% of it is science fiction and fantasy. And then and I think that's a frustration for kids nowadays, because they start with this stuff and then, they graduate to the adult books, right? And it's like, where is it? Yeah.
Between the two of you, you brought up several things that I wanted to talk about, but I am curious, before we go on to anything else, Gautam, have you gone back to read Wheel of Time yet as an adult?
This is like so I have not gone back to read the Wheel of Time. I read the Wheel of Time as a teenager, and I loved books 2, 3, 4, 5. Began to get tired by around book 6 and abandoned it by around 8 or 9. And I did absolutely love the show, and I'm quite gutted that it's been cancelled, because I think that what the show did so well was that it took the wonderful, awe-inspiring and progressive parts of Jordan's book, and adapted them very well, and it very deftly and elegantly dealt with the misogynistic and regressive parts in ways that were quite clever, I thought. And so I'm quite gutted, and I hope that some miracle happens and some other streaming platform picks it up. But to answer your question, I have not reread The Wheel of Time. I don't think the books hold up too well, honestly.
Right.
Yeah. I was just curious. I read the first, I don't know, 5, I think, as a kid. Then I kind of like fell off, went and did some other stuff. And, and then he had that big pause in there as well. And I kind of got back to fantasy and science fiction during his big pause and just kind of went my way a different direction because of that. But when Brandon Sanderson finished them, I came back and reread them all. God help me. I don't know why I did that to myself, but I did. I was just very curious, what you thought about them, and now that you had been writing as a critic and things like that. But I think you kind of answered my question anyway, because you're right. I mean, like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there, man, it just drags. The whole story just droops so bad.
Yeah.
You guys are not the first people I have heard that from. And Jamie, for instance, this is why I think I've read like 2 of the Wheel of Time books, and he was like, yeah, it bogs down in the middle. He lost me. And I'm like, okay, I'll get there eventually. Right. So I haven't yet.
Yeah. I mean, some people swear by those books even now, even to this day, even hearing that critique, they still swear by those books.
Yeah, I think if you get really immersed, into a world, you are willing to forgive a lot, and I think that once you're invested. It takes a lot to drag you out, and I think that's what's going on there.
Now, to be fair, some of my favorite series are like that too, right? Like I read the Honor Harrington books, David Weber, and there are definitely sections that get completely bogged down in infodump. And, I kind of skim those parts so I understand the technology that's important to the plot and I move on, right? But I mean, fair critique. If you're making that critique, I wouldn't even argue with you. So yeah, I get it. And it's cool. You're right. I'm willing to forgive a lot if I'm immersed in the world too.
Gautam, so I do a review column for this podcast as well, where I'll read like 4 or 5 books or whatever. I'll write up a review. I read them. We put it out as what we call an audio column. And, I don't, unless I absolutely hate something, I give it a good review, but I always spin it as, if you like X, Y, and Z, this is your type of thing, like if you like Vikings in space, and I'm just making this up, and time travel, this is the novel for you. You know what I mean?
Cool.
But trying not to be like, like negative about any of it, unless I absolutely hate something, in which case I refuse to review it.
Yeah, that's the way to do it, I think. I mean, that's the way. I mean, the reviewer's task is not to, insert their opinion about a work, but to uncover it and its layers for the reader. And my philosophy is that to say that, look, this is what the book is trying to do, and this is how it's doing it. And if I don't like it, I may just at the end say, in my opinion, it didn't quite succeed in its goals. In a nicer way, of course. But ultimately, then, and often, I mean, the point of a negative review is that readers who don't share your taste will say, "Oh, that sounds interesting to me," and then pick up the book. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair. That's a good way of looking at it. I took on an exercise at one point, and I've kind of been off track with it for a while, but I'm going to get back to it sometime, where I'm going through the imprint called SF Masterworks.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you guys are familiar, a bunch of classic science fiction novels that have influenced the genre, right? And so I'm reading them in order of publication from the imprint, and some of them have been amazing, and some of them have made me want to chew my own leg off, to get out of the snare, right?
Yeah.
This is where I discovered I am not a fan of Philip K. Dick. I think he's terrible. I mean, like, I see what people see in it. I see that, his work has definitely had an influence on the genre. I can respect that. But I, at the same time, I'm like, no, this is just not my cup of tea. And to be fair, I've been a bit savage about it occasionally because I figure he can afford it. He doesn't, he's dead.
He's dead.
Yeah, he's
who cares?
Laughing all the way to the bank and doesn't give a shit whether or not I like it. So I can go, yeah, no, I just can't handle this for various reasons, right? So
yeah.
Gautam,
one thing you need to realize is that there's some context here that you don't know.
Yep.
And that context is Diane and I have this continual argument about she likes Heinlein and I like Philip K. Dick, but neither of us likes the other one. Okay.
Got it. Yeah. So we're constantly getting in little needles on each other, which is what I was doing there. Yes.
I like elements of both, not their entire corpus, but they both have their moments. Let's just put it that way.
They do. Yeah. I agree. And I get Heinlein's not for everybody either. I like it, but yeah, I get why.
I agree.
For everybody, fair, you know?
I was talking to Kat about this not too long ago. Heinlein has such a long career that there's like different phases, you know what I mean?
Yes. So you can like one phase and really hate another, and that's totally
right. Yeah. And I almost think PKD is similar to that.
You were right. I mean, you were right. I actually, to be fair, right, while I'm on so I liked some of his earlier books, right? Genuinely thought they were pretty good, saw the influence, right? Get it. Later on, I think the farther on he goes, the more into stuff that just does not do it for me he gets. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
okay, sorry, way off topic. Let's get back to the other points you were going to ask about there, Alan, because you said you had a bunch of things you wanted to address there.
I was going to segue by saying a lot of these books that we're talking about, right, have pretty convincing or absorbing world building, right? World building that kind of really brings you into the novel, right? Like Wheel of Time, right? Gautam, I would say that The Sentence definitely has some great world building. There's hidden depths there, right? And before I read the end of your book, even, I could tell that there was like just some like historical stuff going on in here, right? Like you were basing things on history. And actually, I don't know if you've ever read any of Ada Palmer's work, but your work kind of reminded me of some of her work.
Yeah. I'm a long-time reader of Ada Palmer, and she writes a column for us at Strange Horizon, which I edit. So I know her work quite well.
Oh, okay. That makes sense to me. Okay. Because it was just something about your discussion of like the politics and the law and everything. I don't want to say I can see her influence in it, but I could see you both, in like parallel veins, you know what I mean? Could you tell us, what events in history influenced The Sentence?
The major event, which I think is pretty obvious, is the Paris Commune. So in 1871, the citizens of Paris had an uprising, a revolution, and this was just in the immediate aftermath of the Prussian-French War, which the French had lost quite badly. And so taking advantage of the general chaos and discontent with the French government, the citizens of Paris had a revolution and they established the Paris Commune, which was a 3-month experiment, in something in between direct democracy, a dollop of anarchism, and experimenting with certain kinds of communal living. And so they narrowed the gap between the representatives and the people, immediate recall provisions, and they implemented many such measures that broadly correspond to what we think of as a kind of socialism, a kind of anarchism. And this lasted only 3 months because then the French army came in, and after an exceptionally violent week, re-established the French government in Paris. And so one of the great things of, I think, writing science fiction, is that you can always ask the what if question. And so here the what if question is, what if something like the Paris Commune had survived, in the middle of what is, of course, broadly a capitalist or capitalizing in that time world. And the other interesting thing is that the Paris Commune and its historical memory gave rise to many other similar experiments. So during the Chinese Revolution, Guangzhou, there was a commune modeled on the Paris Commune. Again, it lasted just 1 month before it was militarily suppressed, and in other countries as well, and in Korea and so on. So in that way, the historical set of events that informed The Sentence were these various historical experiments, all of them more or less failed, to establish this kind of a society. So that was a primary historical influence. And of course, there are many more granular instances from Indian history that parts of the book draw upon. But that is the major one.
I love that you gave anarchism a shake in here, because I feel like until fairly recently, it's, not a lot of authors have explored that sort of a thing. Unless I just haven't read those books. I guess that's possible too.
No, they haven't. So there is, there's of course Nick Mamatas does that, but his books are published by AK Press, so the distribution is quite limited. And there are a couple of others. There's actually, I'm in Sydney right now, and there's a bookshop here called Jura Books, which is an anarchist bookshop, and they have a fiction shelf, and you find, if you're looking for anarchist science fiction, you'll find it in that bookshop in Sydney. But you're right in that it's almost it is negligible in the genre.
Yeah. What is your interest in anarchism?
So I like many people, my first experience with anarchism was Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed, which is such a rigorous, such a fascinating, such a loving exploration of what an anarchist society might look like if it was allowed to survive. And again, what would human beings do? So that was my introduction to anarchism, was actually through science fiction. And then through history, reading history, a lot of 19th century Russian history. So before the Bolsheviks, there were the anarchists, and they had their own views and ideas about how the revolution should come. And of course, they were the proponents of the propaganda of the deed, so assassinations, all of that. So I read a fair bit about that. And then I was in a reading group. Still, I'm in a reading group. And in that reading group, we discussed a lot of, strands of left wing politics, and there was someone in the group, and who I know, who's in my life, who really knows a lot about anarchism, and I got a lot of fascinating readings from them, and that's been shaping my own inner landscape since then. So that's been my history of engagement with anarchism.
So let me ask you something, right? Because I have a lot of sympathy for anarchism. I live in my own living situation in a semi-communal environment. I suppose this is something that I should probably give some context for, right? I am in a polyamorous relationship. I live with other adults. We pooled our resources to buy this house. None of us would have been able to afford to do this on our own, right? We pool our finances. We don't really care where the money came from. We make financial decisions based on, okay, what has the most need right now, right? And then when there is leftover money, it's all right. So how badly does X person want whatever? And then we get it. Right. So that's kind of how we work. Right. I love this kind of living. I think that there's so many benefits to it. One of which being that you can punch above your weight. Right. You can do things that otherwise you would not be able to do. I spent most of my adult life in abject poverty. Right. So I'm like literally at one point I was supporting the household's groceries on what I made busking. Right. So I've seen the alternative. But here I am, I managed to buy a house, and it's only with the help of this sort of structure. So what is it? Because this pisses me off, right? What is it that always seems to break it down? People come up with these great ideas. Is it always military force? Is it something internal? What is it that stops it from being a more common thing?
Yeah, I think different people will give different answers to this question. My view is on a reading of the history and just like looking around you. I think that there are two things. One, of course, is that whenever any attempt at organizing, even micro societies on anarchist lines, what they call prefiguration, right, becomes serious, then it is repressed. And this is not just the Paris Commune. This is not just these historical communes, but take something like the encampments that came up in various U.S. Colleges last year with respect to the genocide in Palestine. And from what I know, many of these encampments, the way the principles of mutual aid, of solidarity, and all of that are in the finest traditions of anarchism. and we have seen the amount of repression and the ferocity of the repression that has followed, even though none of these encampments were at any point a threat to the stability of the US, right? So it's not that the repression happens through the force of arms when you have something as as big as the Paris Commune. The repression happens in so many ways. The moment it becomes clear that someone is trying to organize themselves on these lines, and I think that there's so many things, right? So all these laws that prevent people from salvage, from repair, to the whole right to repair movement. So wherever there is some kind of resistance to capitalist social relations, you find immediate repression. Right? So I think that's one thing. And the second is that because all of us are interpolated within capitalism, and all of us are dependent upon the market to survive, autarky can only take you so far. So, for example, look at something like the Mondragon Cooperative, right? So, the Mondragon Cooperative in Spain, it begins as this idealistic, desire of organizing a cooperative that would give its workers dignity and rights, and would not be exploitative. But then to be viable, you have to compete with all the capitalist firms around you. And the only way you do that is to reorganize yourself internally in some ways along capitalist lines, just a more gentler, humane version of that. And so I think in that sense, the other reason why these attempts often break down is because ultimately you can't, anarchism can't be an island, in a notion of capitalism. It's very, very hard, unless of course you're doing it in a very, very small scale. So I think the moment you try and expand, and the moment you try and just, well, expand might be the wrong word, but the moment that happens, then again you find yourself coming up against the laws of the market, and then you have to, alter your own structural organization just to be able to survive in that context. So I think that's why you have these experiments having a very difficult time throughout history, and even continuing today.
I wouldn't disagree with you. I've even found that in our little small thing that we do. One thing I hear from a lot of people is that, when they're looking to buy a house, right? Realtors or whatever tend to tell them, oh, well, yeah, okay, so you and your son can pool your resources to buy a house, but one of you has to be able to afford the payments and credit check your own. Yeah. Why? That's stupid. That makes no sense at all. And the only reason why that exists is because somebody decided that, they just didn't like the alternative. There's no reason for that. We were lucky enough
Absolutely.
when he was willing to slip us through the cracks, but we had some trouble. It took us a while to be able to find something that suited us as a result. So I feel you, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely, you're completely right. And there are a few YouTube videos that just talk about, again, this prefiguration and how to do that in society. And yeah, you can see how hard it is. So I think that's definitely absolutely right.
Awesome, thank you. What a great answer.
Yeah, oh yeah,
awesome.
Do you think there's any way that could be successful?
So I mean, there is this fantastic essay called Forest and Factory on this website called EndNotes, which addresses this question in some detail. And I think that ultimately what they say is that, well, you can't ever know if you'll be successful, right? So you can't know if it'll happen in your lifetime, probably not, and you can't know when it'll happen. And also, and this is a little frightening, but I think it's also true, you can't even know what shape it'll take. And so there's no, in the very nature of things, you can't have an advanced blueprint for what that society would look like when it would come into being. You can, of course, have broad brush, ideas of the ways you will organize yourselves, but the whole point of the society is that it's only in the living of it through which those principles will emerge. So in that way, you can't have a blueprint and you wouldn't know. But again, what you can do is in your own situation, try and move towards it in whatever ways that you can, and then over time see where that leads you. So I think it's not a very comforting answer, but I think it is an answer of sorts, which is that, I mean, the answer is not passivity. The answer is never passivity. The answer is always to move towards that, even though you don't know where you're going and if you'll ever get there.
That makes a lot of sense.
I'm curious. In your book, there's basically like three factions, I guess. There's two big factions. One's the Anarchist Commune, right? The other is this more kind of like, I don't know how you describe them. This section kept trying to go back to the old imperial ways as described in the book, but they were more of kind of like a board of, I don't want to say a board of directors. The main guy, like the head person, was a director, but also
they got a merchant prince, basically. You can think of it as a merchant prince, like set of people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then in the middle, there's the neutral people, right? There's like this neutral group. They're basically like lawyers, more or less. They're supposed to keep the peace between everybody.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, within the book, you have the laws frozen for 100 years, right?
Yeah.
Based on what you just said about, anarchism being stomped out, in our real world, did you feel like you had to freeze the laws in the book to make that anarchist commune more realistic?
No. So that was a different, that drew upon a different set of historical events, which is to say that and I maybe should have mentioned this when you asked me what the historical events were. So in many Latin American countries, you had these very violent civil wars in the second half of the 20th century or even earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And these were often fought to stalemates, and these were often very, very vicious. And then, to move on from that, there had to be a peace agreement. And the peace agreement, therefore, do a couple of things. It had to, first of all, provide an amnesty. It had to forgive crimes that were committed by either side in the run-up leading to the civil war. And also then, to maintain stability, it had to preserve itself. So, for a certain amount of time, you can't alter the terms of this agreement, because otherwise you'll just go right back to the war again, right? And so, what in constitutional law we call transitional arrangements have been an integral part of reconstructing post-conflict societies.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a transitional arrangement. So the idea is that until we stabilize ourselves, this is the interim arrangement which will govern us, and nobody can change this, because otherwise you'll just go back to fighting again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, very few of these have been 100 years long, but again, that's the beauty of science fiction. You can just take that idea and extend that and just expand that.
Okay, cool. I kind of want to bring this back to your world building a little bit. As I said, you have a very engaging world here. You've obviously thought a lot about it. You have this neutral group in the middle, which are kind of like lawyers, sort of. But in order for this world to work, right, and be immersive, you've obviously had to think about the laws, right? Because the main character is one of these neutral lawyers too, and it's kind of like a science fiction John Grisham here, right? How did you go about thinking about the laws in this made up world? Obviously you use history to some degree, but you mashed a lot of stuff in there, right?
Yeah.
So how did you just think of a bunch of possibilities and write out the laws, or did you kind of just deal with it as it came, or how did that work for you?
Oh no, these are all drawn from our world. So, for example, in an early part of the book, there is a discussion about whether there are provisions in the charter that are so fundamental to its existence that they can never be changed and are essentially permanent. Now, that is tapping into this very, very intense debate in global constitutional law about whether constitutions have certain provisions so integral to their very identity that they can't be altered using the amendment processes, but have attained a sort of what they're literally called eternity clauses in some countries, right? So that was drawn from there. A lot of the criminal law death penalty stuff was again the history of India's very troubled engagement with death penalty, right? So every aspect of the law in this novel has an analog in our world. And it's sort of a melange of these things put together, that constructs the legal system of this world.
Interesting.
I love that. Because it gives it verisimilitude, Yeah. And I recognize quite a few of the examples too, but not all of them. I clearly need to do some boning up.
No, I mean, so that's the thing. A lot of the examples which are sort of hidden in the book will only make sense to Indians, because this was written as a book by an Indian novelist for an Indian audience.
Mhm.
Now, I mean, of course, the attempt is to still not take away the joy of reading it for non-Indians. But it's just that much
Right.
like, for example, if an American writes a book, there will be just references, cultural signposts, which Americans will get and others will not. So it's just that kind of a thing. It's not it doesn't in any way take away from the story, but it's just a little additional icing, on the cake for Indian readers. It's just there by virtue of my being an Indian and living in India and working in India. But it's really interesting. You talk about that the very similitude, because when I had my signing on conversation with my literary agent earlier this year, he said, "Yeah, I mean, this is technically science fiction, but there is like this you lose one element of the science, which is the revival after cryosleep, and that is effectively a heuristic, to let you explore the ideas you're exploring. So in that way, this could be in the science fiction shelf, it could also be in any other shelf in the
Fair.
bookshop, So yeah.
No, that's cool. Actually, I can appreciate that. I've got a world that I'm writing recurring stories in with a recurring cast of characters that's very Canadian. And I'm not sure that non-Canadians are going to get a lot of the context there. I could not publish it. The first story that was published in an American publication, I tried quite a few, but it ended up being a British publication that published it finally. So maybe, maybe not. But yeah, I get that. That's cool. Okay. Well, and then I got to bone up on the history of India for sure.
Well, I mean, I will say, like, not knowing the history of India particularly well, I thought it was great. Like, I had no problem following the political and sociological discourse, subtext of the book. I mean, I didn't get the icing on the cake, but it didn't really matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So another aspect of your book is about capital punishment, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens in this universe is if you are sentenced to capital punishment, they basically put you on cryosleep until either it's proven that you're not guilty or basically your body degenerates to the point where you can't be in cryosleep anymore and they take you out and you die.
Yeah.
Also, obviously, some stuff from India going on here, and I'm kind of curious about that as well.
Yeah.
What's your take on capital punishment? And let's just start there. What's your take on capital punishment?
Oh, I've always been an abolitionist. Ever since I had a view on this. So it's as simple as that.
Okay.
Yep, 100%. Totally agree with you, by the way.
Yeah, same. Yeah. I'm kind of curious about the stuff in India that has happened that, brought you to this cryo sleep idea.
Yeah, I mean, so in India, we've had the death penalty since forever. And there was one brief moment where it was challenged before the Supreme Court in 1980, and it was upheld. And in many ways, we have been regressing, becoming crueler, like just becoming fonder of the spectacle of sentencing people to death, and the cause of abolition has never seemed further away than it does now, because there is a kind of bloodthirstiness that often seems to grip our society, which is quite frightening at times. And like I said, ever since I had a view on the issue, and many of my other views have over the years maybe started from a more centrist, perspective and gradually moved leftwards. This was one where I was always absolutely, sure since I was a kid. And then of course, as in law school and following that in law, you can't avoid this because it's all over the place. And even though India does not execute people too often, it's relatively rare. What happens is that the trial courts very, very liberally hand out death sentences, because for them, their view is that, okay, if we screw up, then the High Court will correct us. If the High Court screws up, the Supreme Court will correct them. So, we'll just like be cautious and we'll avoid death penalty because we don't want it on our heads if we don't, make a show of punishing this person. And so the trial courts hand out tons of death sentences, and the High Court, it decreases a little bit, and the Supreme Court, it decreases even more. What it does mean is that there are a lot of people on death row, and instead of squarely confronting this question, we have developed this whole range of procedural, gimmicks of a death sentence, then a review, another review, a mercy plea, a challenge to the rejection of the mercy plea, a review of that. So it basically, even once the Supreme Court affirms a death sentence, the procedural hearings go on for years after that. And so people spend lives on death row, right? So this is what we do, unfortunately. And so when you have the arguments in India, I think this is true for arguments anywhere across the world, one of the questions that arises is always, well, what is the big difference between death penalty and any other kind of punishment? It's just a more severe form for a more severe crime. So what's your issue? And the answer has always been that the difference is that death is irreversible. And so, whereas in another kind of punishment, if you have found you've made a mistake, you can, in some ways, atone for it. You can release the imprisoned person. You can try and set them back, up on their feet by compensating them, doing what you can. Of course, you can never give them back their lost years, but you can try to atone. Whereas with death, you can never atone, because if you made a mistake, that's it. The person's dead. And should fallible human beings assume infallibility when they award the sentence? But there was something about that argument which never quite convinced me fully. It seemed to me that the objections to death penalty lay at a much more fundamental level. And so, of course, as with science fiction, then you can do the what if, right? So, okay, so what if you could actually bring people back? Would that make it okay? And then what does that tell us about our intuitions about this, right? That was how the idea of the book was informed by the debates that I've engaged with on the non-fiction side in Indian constitutional law and in Indian politics more generally.
Interesting. What do you think a fair punishment is like for somebody who does something horrible?
I'm still formulating my views on that, but I'm quite on the side of the anti-incarceration, prison abolition movement. It's still that the problem is that the literature of the prison abolition movement is almost exclusively American, and obviously that doesn't apply. In many ways, it doesn't apply to the Indian context. So
it doesn't even apply in some cases to Canadian politics, and we're probably the most similar country in many ways in the world. So
yeah. So the prison abolition literature, gives me an idea of where it's at, but I have to do a lot more thinking myself to really be able to formulate my own views in the Indian context. And I do know that the side I come down on is prisons do not solve anything. Prisons are not a solution. So what is a solution? I don't yet know. That's like lifetime's work, I guess. So we'll see.
Awesome. Okay. I kind of want to change gears a little bit. Okay, so we've had S.B. Divya on, who I think might be the only other Indian guest we've ever had on, and she lives in California now. I'm very curious what the publishing scene is like in India, because I don't think we've ever talked about that.
Yeah. That's a good question. So you mean the publishing scene in terms of genre fiction?
Yeah, genre fiction. Well, okay, let me give a little context for the audience and Diane too. A while back, Diane, we spoke with, I'm forgetting their name right now, the New Zealand author. I just mentioned them on a podcast not too long ago because I was reading their second book. And we had an interesting conversation about how Canadian and New Zealand publishing is very similar, like what happens with the genre fiction and that sort of a thing versus, US publishing. And I'm kind of wondering, like what happens with, genre fiction in India? Are there a lot of people getting published in general, or do you have to wait for, someone else to come in and publish? I've also talked significantly with people about publishing in Africa as well. So I'm kind of just, even on just like a national level, like how does it all work out, So I guess there's a lot of questions in there.
Yeah. So Indian, so we have, in India, we have imprints of the various big publishers, right? So we have HarperCollins India, Penguin India, Simon & Schuster India, and we have, of course, Indian presses, Juggernaut, Westland, and so on. Now, most of Indian fiction is literary fiction. So there's a very specific kind of literary fiction that is, marketed as Indian literary fiction. For a long time, there was virtually no genre writing in English. This changed in around the year 2001 or 2 when Samit Basu wrote the Sequal Prophecies, which was perhaps the first real foray into an Indian author writing what you can identify as the genre of fantasy. And for a while, he was the only person doing that. This began to change around 2015, 16. And then bit by bit, you had writers publishing with your traditional imprints. HarperCollins, Penguin, and so on. HarperCollins India, Penguin India, and so on. And then this has gradually now grown. And so I have a Substack where I among other things, do a survey of developments in Indian genre fiction. And last year, there were 8 such books published out of India, which could qualify as fantasy or science fiction, which has been the highest number ever, I think. So I think it is changing. We are very, very far away from the kind of science fiction boom that China had 10 years ago. And that's, of course, because China had state support. We have no state support. In part, of course, this is not a takeaway from the brilliance of Chinese science fiction, because it is genuinely brilliant. But there is also a lot of infrastructural support that goes on over there. It's also nowhere close to establishing an identity such as African futurism or Afrofuturism. It's still quite far away from that. But it is changing. And for the first time last year, Westland Books began the first ever English language Indian SFFH imprint called If. And The Sentence was the second book in the If imprint. And I am presently working with Westland on editing and publishing an anthology of new Indian science fiction, which should come out in a couple of months, also in the If imprint. So that is changing. I think it is changing in a good way. I think many challenges remain. The first is that there is still a massive, massive difference between being published in India by an Indian publisher and being published in the West and then being sold in an Indian bookshop. Because reflexively, there is the assumption that you are legitimate if you're published by Harper Voyager and not if you're published by HarperCollins India. This is a big problem. The accompanying problem is that much more so than in Western countries, there is a tendency to not take genre fiction seriously in India if it's not fiction. It's of course it's a problem that science fiction writers have grappled with for decades, and it's been very annoying. But in India, it's even more of an entrenched distinction than it perhaps is in the West now. So that is also a problem. And of course, then you have your standard problems of tiny advances. Distribution is hard. People don't pick up genre fiction. Marketing a genre fiction book is very, very hard. And so we are still doing what we've always done, which is that, okay, like you write a book and it's published in India, but really, if you want to be read in any meaningful way, it has to happen outside India. It's just not possible within the country if you're doing English language science fiction. So we all of us Indian writers, try to be picked up by an agent and a publisher abroad. Some of us succeed, some of us don't, but that's how it goes. But we can't. Without that, we can't be read. So I think that's still a problem. And again, hopefully it will change over time with infrastructure like, this imprint, new imprint, more writers, perhaps Indian magazines, perhaps conventions at some point. But without the infrastructure, it's not going to change.
Well, do us a favor and hit us up when that anthology comes out so we can make sure to shout it out on the show.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think July was the original date. I have sent in my edits. I'm just waiting for the publisher to get back. So we'll see. Maybe a little delayed, but I don't think it'll go beyond August. So definitely.
What's the title?
We're still figuring it out. Yeah.
Okay. Great. No, hit us up and let us know so we can talk about it. I know that our audience, like us, really want to support expansion of science fiction and decolonializing science fiction in general. So absolutely, we would definitely want people to know about it.
Yeah, I just perhaps just one word of caution there. The word decolonial has different meanings. In India, decolonial is a right-wing,
Oh, okay. Oh, well, that's the wrong word then.
So it's the return to a pre-colonial, pristine Indian past, which, yeah, it has its issues.
Okay, no, that's not what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, I know. I know that in different countries, decolonial means different things. In India, unfortunately, it shouldn't have been. Unfortunately, decolonial has become the favorite word of the right wingers. So
Oh, in that case, I'll say de-Westernizing. Perhaps that's a better description. Yeah, we science fiction's for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So I want a science fiction and a fantasy market where everybody is included and you don't have to write according to American standards and tropes in order to get your stuff seen. So anything we can do to further that, we're here for it.
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate that. And I think that's important because, so just to be in full disclosure, from January onwards, I've signed with a literary agent and there are some, the talk in this, it's in progress, but I mean, the sentence should come out, outside India sometime in a couple of years. So I sort of like, I'm on the other side now of that equation.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think this is important because if you have, and this is with no offense to anyone involved, but if you are, if say as an Indian, you are published by Tor or Orbit or Harper Voyager or whichever imprint it is, in certain ways you've been given like a stamp of approval by the literary establishment, in the West, and there is great work out of all these, not just India, out of all these countries, which because it is so particular and unique and doesn't appear, classically Indian, is not given that, stamp of approval. So it's also, I think what you're saying is important because ultimately the kinds of books you'll get in the US bookshops, even though they're written by Indians or written by, whatever, any nationality here, that doesn't matter, South Africans or Egyptians or whatever, ultimately they have come through the gatekeeping that is American gatekeeping, right? So
yes.
you also get stuff that hasn't made it past those gatekeepers.
Yes, exactly. A very good point. And that's why we want to change that. We want to
yeah.
Well, Diane, you've even complained about that, just being Canadian,
Yep, just being Canadian has created gatekeeping in the same way. I've had a few stories that have had difficulty finding homes because they're not American, and that, if I'm feeling that frustration, right, it's got to be 10 times worse for anyone for whom English is a second language in some way, right? Yeah.
Okay, I just glanced at the time. We need to start winding this thing down. Aww. I'm sure Gautam has other things to do.
I'm having such a good time, though. This has been such a great discussion.
It's been fantastic.
I know, it flew by. We've come to the question. Gautam, with the world being as it is right now, what is bringing you hope?
Yeah, I think it's always acts of solidarity that take place in small, communities and small groups, affinity groups, things like that. So in these, as they say, building the new in the ruins of the old. So it's always been these acts, these collective acts. They're not individual acts; they're collective acts. But collective acts at the small scale level, which you hope that over a long time, signal that they can translate into something that is bigger.
Awesome. Very good point.
What do you have coming out soon? What kind of work would you like to, put out there on the internet for everybody to know about?
So nothing coming out soon because of the fact that the after finishing the sentence and after it coming out soon after that, I signed with, like I said, I signed with this agent, and then he one thing he recommended was to work on something that is akin to a sequel to the sentence because of the fact that this world has a lot left to explore.
Yes.
But with me, one problem I have is that it's very difficult for me to start work on the next thing before the previous thing is just like completely done and dusted. And so because there might be now there might now be a few more edits to the sentence when it goes into a different market, I still am mentally in that world. But I have outlined and I've started work on a sequel of a kind to the sentence. But that of course is another book length project, and it'll take like a year or so to write. So yeah, I mean nothing new immediately. Maybe a couple of short stories which are on submission, but I don't know what will happen to them right now. But I guess the big thing is the anthology that I'm editing, which will be out quite soon. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I will be very interested in the sequel, especially, and I'm not going to give any details here, but especially the way that you left that ending. I'll be very interested.
If anyone's interested, actually, even because the earliest the sentence will come to the US is 2027. And so if anyone is interested in getting a copy, there is a bookshop in India called Midland, Midland, and they actually ship abroad. And from what I've heard from people, they've been getting copies. Their copies in the US, Australia, and so on from Midland, the Midland bookshop. So if you are interested, that's a place to order the book from.
Great. Poke us again closer to January so we can remind our audience as well that it may be more widely available at that time, because it's a long way away and people will forget. So
feel free at any time. Yeah, I really enjoyed the sentence quite a bit. And yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the next thing, including your anthology. So yeah, definitely let us know.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody were to want to follow you online to find out about the stuff on their own, where would they find you?
It's at Gautam Bathia 88, GAUTAMBHATIA 88 on I still call it Twitter. I refuse to call it X, just sort of nostalgia. And it's Gautam.Bhatia at Blue Sky. Sorry. It's again. So it's the same thing. Gautam Bathia 88 dot Blue Sky. So you can find me there on Blue Sky. And yeah, these are the two social media platforms that I use primarily.
Okay, I'll go follow you on Blue Sky. I made the shift with all the other SIFWA type authors. Right?
Yeah, no, I'm still on Twitter because that's where Palestine, is the only place you can really find out what's happening in Palestine.
Yes.
Where all the Palestinians are. So I'm staying on there because I don't want to leave that. But yeah, Blue Sky is where all the writers are. So I'm on both.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you say earlier you had a Substack where you talked about Indian science fiction fantasy?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I do. It's called one sec. Let me. It's my name, GautamBhatia.substack.com. It's a fortnightly Substack where I just talk about what I'm reading and developments in the Indian genre space, if there are any that fortnight.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you. Had a great time.
Flew by so fast. Love having you here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
That was our interview with Gautam Bathia. Before we continue on, don't forget to share our podcast with your friends on, I don't know, whatever social media you're on these days. Please rate and review us. Those are really the most important things. But if you really want to contribute to what we're doing in a monetary fashion, we would greatly welcome that. You can check us out on patreon.com/ifthisgoeson. And you can also find us on Ko-fi. That's KOFI. That would be fantastic. But we realize that's not the case for everybody, and that's okay. So at least share us with your friends. So all of that said, takeaways, thoughts, opinions.
I can't wait to read more of his stuff, actually. It's so interesting, right? The depth of exploration. And I really appreciate coming at science fiction with, anarchism being given a space in it. It's something that you pointed out doesn't happen nearly often enough. And the whole point of science fiction is to explore, well, what if we tried something different, right? What would the consequences be if we made this shift? I'd really like to see more of that because honestly, I'm definitely a bit of an anarchist myself, and I don't understand why it's not more popular among people. Right. Yeah, I don't know. I promise not to get off on too many tangents because Alan and I both have things to do, so I'm not going to wax poetic about that anymore. But yeah.
Yeah, for real. Well, this kind of goes back to my constant complaint of, why is there another interstellar kingdom? Why? Yeah. You know what I mean? And I get that's what people know and stuff. And gosh, I feel like I read some criticism recently that even pointed out some things that made me think, okay, I kind of get that. But I still feel like, as I always say, I'm going to beat the dead horse one more time. We should be thinking about other things. There's other things. Okay, maybe we don't talk about straight anarchism, but maybe we talk about some combination of anarchism with something else. You know what I mean? So yeah, let's continue to explore it,
100%.
people.
I know the answer. The answer is because we have more examples of that in history than any other thing when we're talking about a far-flung society where crossing distances takes time, right? Like we've seen that in history primarily through empires, and but I would like other options. And there would be other options. Like, honestly, when you think about it, right? If you go into another planet, then you have an opportunity to start over and do things completely differently. Yeah. You don't have to do whatever came before. Wouldn't that be part of the point?
Yeah.
To go somewhere else and to do something else? Yeah.
Funny enough, this segues perfectly into what I'm reading right now. I am currently reading the 8th book in the Expanse series.
Ooh, okay, yeah.
Tiamat's Wrath. And by this point, they've expanded beyond the solar system. Sorry if that's a spoiler to anybody out there. Apologies, but they have.
You know what? I'm still early in the series, but I mean, that's obviously where they're going. Yeah. I don't think that's a spoiler. Carry on.
and I kind of wish, where I'm at in the 8th book, they have not really talked about many other kind of governments out there in the universe. And I feel like that's a little bit of a missed opportunity on their part.
Right.
Right. But, that said, I still love the Expanse series, so whatever.
For sure. It kind of segues into what I'm reading right now, too. I'm in the process of rereading the Aubrey Maturin novels, which are it's historical fiction, actually, right? I think I mentioned that before, high seas sailing during the Napoleonic Wars, right? Which, of course, is the exact opposite. We are dealing with expanded empires over long distances and the people who have loyalty to those empires, right? So, yeah, I mean, they're good books. And it's interesting to see how people work to adapt to systems that aren't necessarily human friendly in many ways, right? They have rules. There's a lot of rules in the British Royal Navy, and they generally don't apply to real life. So people do a lot of workarounds in them, and I find it really entertaining. The current book I'm reading is one I had not yet read, because when I was collecting the series, I didn't have this one, so I skipped ahead. This one is called The Surgeon's Mate. This deals more with Maturin than Aubrey, which is a kind of cool element about the books. Jamie, my partner, pointed out to me before, and I agree with him, that you could read the whole book and think the whole series and think it was about Aubrey, and then you could reread the whole series and think it was about Maturin, and either one would be correct, right? So, but in this case, Maturin does intelligence work for the Royal Navy, and a lot of his intelligence ties and ways around bureaucracy work in there too. Right. And it's just very interesting. It's a good thought experiment in a way for how we adapt to these systems that they're not human friendly. Real people don't think that way. Yeah. Right. But there's this big government or corporate agency that requires us to think in a certain way, and we have to at least pretend to play by those rules. Right. Yeah.
Interesting. Someday I will get around to those.
Oh, they're fun.
Someday. Are you reading anything else?
No, not really. I mean, I didn't finish the sentence. I have read part of it. We were sent a copy for review, a digital copy for review. Yeah. And it's got me interested. Definitely I'm engaged, and I love the subject matter, and I like a good legal thriller. So it's all good for me that way, right? So definitely would recommend.
Awesome. Let's see. So at the top, I mentioned I've been getting into comic books a little bit more than usual. because I make it sound like I never read comic books, which is
you
false.
did kind of. And I was like, wait a minute. No, we've had conversations like this before.
Yeah. I definitely, I just don't read, like, I don't read a lot of superhero comic books.
Sure.
Like, for example, laying next to me, I have Bone, you know. I also have Transmetropolitan, which I know, Warren Ellis, scumbag, but, you know, still a classic graphic novel set, right? But I have been reading, most recently, Doctor Strange in Asgard.
Ooh, okay.
Oh, no, sorry, Doctor Strange of Asgard.
Ooh, okay, yeah.
And I've only read the first one, so I'm just getting into it. I think it was a little over my kid's head, but I read it and I was like, oh, this is like the best thing I've read that you've gotten. I like this. So it's been interesting. There's like so much weird stuff going on in comic books. I'm starting to like appreciate the weird pulpiness of comic books, I think.
Yes.
You know, it's just madness.
Yes. You have to suspend your logic and go, okay, so this is a totally different world where there is different logic there. But if you can do that, the rules are generally consistent internally anyway, right? I love superhero comics. It's, you know, maybe it's a guilty pleasure for me, but honestly, you know, I don't know. Everyone wants to imagine themselves as a superhero, right? What would you do if you had these kind of powers? How would you change the world?
Yeah.
You know, that's fun.
Yeah. I'm also reading a book called Stoker's Wild West by Stephen Hopstickin and Melissa Prusi.
Okay.
So I read the first one of these. Oh my God, it must have been 4 years ago or something. Probably right when we were starting this podcast, because I reviewed it like way back. And you know how it is. There's so many books to read, and it's a series, and it fell off my radar for a little bit, but I found the second one in like a used bookstore somewhere. So I picked it up, and I finally get around to reading it. And man, I'm like really enjoying it. And so the idea of it is Oscar Wilde and Stoker, like the guy who wrote Dracula. What's his name? Bram Stoker. And Bram Stoker are like, they're the main characters of the story.
Cool.
Okay?
I think I've heard about this, but I haven't read it yet myself. Tell me more.
Okay. And they like accidentally become vampire hunters, basically, or at least accidentally become involved in the supernatural, right? But as of right now, primarily vampire hunters.
Yeah.
There's other stuff too. And it's just, and it's told mostly through like letters, you know, and
love it.
Documents, like diaries and all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah, epistolary. It's an epistolary story. Yeah.
Epistolary, perfect, yes. Epistolary. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. You know what I mean? Like, looking back now, and to be totally fair, the first book I read was it was an arc, so there may have been more editing to go before that book was actually released when I read the first one. I had some critiques of the first one, but I feel like the second one is hitting on all cylinders. You know what I mean? Like,
cool.
It's fun. It knows it's fun. It does some exploration of like LGBTQ.
Well, with Oscar Wilde as a main character, naturally.
Exactly. It does some exploration of that in the, like, you know, the 1800s. It does some little bit of exploration with race and stuff like that. Not a lot on the race side, at least not yet, that I've seen. So it's interesting, but it's just wild fun. There's like nothing too serious about it. You know what I mean?
I love Weird West as a genre. And actually, speaking of which, for the first time in a while, I wrote a Weird West story recently for my Weird West world.
Nice.
I was writing it for an anthology because there was this Weird West anthology coming out that's featuring all women authors. I don't remember the title of it, but I'm definitely going to shout it out because I was like, I'm down for this, right? But, you know, short story, 5,000 words, word count limit. And my original draft of the story was something like 8,000 words. And I did not successfully get it cut down in time. I don't care because the point of it was to write the story, but I had a really cool idea that I ran with and I had a lot of fun. How I did this, the writers, and we said we weren't going to get off on tangents, but here we go, right?
Last one.
Yeah, okay, fine, right? There were these writing prompts that are created for a Game of Tomes event, right? It's one of the things we tend to do is, one of the exercises that's offered. And the writing prompts this time were not a theme. They usually are, but this time they weren't, because we thought of it at the last minute and therefore generated all the writing prompts from people calling out stuff in my stream, right? So then what I did is I took this list of prompts as a plot outline, right? And I'm like, okay, so the story will follow these prompts and I will use them to create the story. It was a great exercise. Other writers are listening to this and going, oh, that sounds like fun. I know they are, right? And yeah, hell of a good time. Turned out to be a really good story. Really like it. So Weird West is back in action. Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. Ready to close it up for the day?
Yeah, let's close it up for the day before I start babbling about something else nonsensically.
No. It's not nonsensical. That's the problem.
Yeah, I guess, right?
Thanks to our audience for continuing to listen to us for some reason or another.
Yeah, I appreciate it because it lets me have this kind of fun. Thank you guys so much for all your support.
Yeah, seriously. And I guess that's it for us. We are keeping hope alive one episode at a time. If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited and produced by Alan Bailey. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower. Additional music is by Christopher Snydrowski. And outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. Special thanks to our guest, Gautam Bathia. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.